Please mute yourself. In order to limit our interruptions, it's important that you stay muted. Also, we're going to be showing a short video, different from the one that you may have already looked at. And the sound on that video might be a little bit lower than normal. So make sure that the audio on your computer is high enough so that you can hear the video, short video that we'll be showing you later on in this program. We welcome your questions, but please send them to me, Lily Feiler, and I will be the one to be asking the guests, as well as Richard and Robert, the questions. I hope you all had an opportunity to watch a video entitled Rosenwald, a Remarkable Story of a Jewish Partnership with African American Communities. It will be available for you to watch until midnight tonight. I will now turn the program over to Judge Richard Gergel, who will introduce our guests and give an overview of today's program. Richard, please take it from here.
Thank you, Dr. Feiler. You know, this program today came as something, the fullness of this story, as a surprise to Robert and myself. We knew who Julius Rosenwald was, who of course was the genius behind Sears. And we knew that he had had something then called the Rosenwald Fund that had given donations, but that was about the extent of our knowledge. And I had the privilege, I don't know, 3-4 years ago, to have dinner at Dr. Nussbaum's house, one of our guests, and he had a friend, Andrew Feiler from Atlanta. And the two of them were talking about these Rosenwald schools and how they had been photographing them. And it was just sort of a remarkable sort of story that began to unfold that has now become a book by Mr. Feiler. There it is. We'll see other copies of it. A wonderful book, A Better Life for Their Children. Julius Rosenwald, Booker T. Washington, and the 4,978 schools that changed America. This is like one of the greatest stories of philanthropy in American history. This is one of the great unknown Jewish stories in Jewish American history. 580 of these schools were in South Carolina. What a remarkable act of generosity. And they were in communities, many of which had no formal education for African American children. The impact of these schools was just tremendous in the 15 southern states in which the Rosenwald Fund funded these schools. And as we get into the program, we'll get into not the other things the Rosenwald Fund did, including giving creative scholarships or fellowships to young artists who became the most renowned African American writers, artists, and performers of their generation and multiple generations. So with that, let me introduce our two guests. Andrew Feiler of Atlanta is an activist in Jewish and civic causes in his native state of Georgia. He has traveled the South documenting the story with photography and interviews. This has been captured in his new book. Andrew has an undergraduate degree from Wharton School of Business, an MBA from Stanford, and a master's degree in modern history from Oxford. He also has been a force of nature in Georgia politics, leading early efforts on behalf of Stacey Abrams, and recently a strong supporter of the Senate elections of John Ossoff and Reverend Raphael Warnock. Andrew believes his work is a continuation of the work begun in the partnership between Julius Rosenwald and Booker T. Washington. Dr. Alan Nussbaum has devoted his last 5 years documenting photography, the rehabilitation of a particular South Carolina school, Rosenwald School in St. George, South Carolina. This is an inspiring story of the community's devotion to preserving this special part of its past. Alan is a graduate of Johns Hopkins, the Harvard School of Medicine, and did his residency at Duke. He has practiced medicine in Charleston for over 40 years. Alan has been a great leader in South Carolina Jewish community, chairing the Jewish Studies Board, been president of Emmanuel Synagogue in Charleston, and many other leadership positions. Our program today is going to begin. Robert is going to interview Andrew and let him tell a story about these schools, comparing them with these fantastic photographs Andrew has taken as he's traveled 15,000 miles across the South. Alan is then going to share with us some of the images from the rehabilitation over the last 5 years of the Rosenwald School in St. George. And then we'll finish with about a 3.5-minute interview with one of the attendees of that school and the mayor of St. George, both of whom have played a central role in the rehabilitation of the Rosenwald School in St. George. So with that, Robert, let me hand it off to you.
Thank you. I want to say how much I've enjoyed this. If you have not seen the documentary, you really need to see it. I mean, Julius Rosenwald it's just an unbelievable story of actually a Jewish merchant who grew up across the street from Abraham Lincoln's house in Springfield, Illinois. Everybody wants to know what inspired Julius Rosenwald. Apparently, Abraham Lincoln had a lot to do. He was born in 1862. So, I mean, the story is just an incredible story. So, with that, I want to give Andrew another plug. Andrew, I ordered your book from Amazon. It arrived yesterday. I read all the stuff about South Carolina. So, it's a very interesting book. And the foreword of the book is a very moving foreword by John Lewis. So Andrew, can you give us a brief background on Julius Rosenwald and this partnership, this remarkable partnership with Booker T. Washington to build nearly 5,000 schools throughout the South?
Great. Thank you, Robert. I'm Andrew Feiler. It is great to be with y'all. Alan Nussbaum and I have been friends for a long time. My wife, Laura Adams, is a fixture in the Seaweed community, Southeast Wildlife Exposition community, and every year we come to South Carolina to show her work as part of that. And so Alan and Nita and Laura and I have dinner together every year. And one year, Alan and I were asking each other, what are you working on? And it turned out we were both working on Rosenwald Schools projects. So I have been looking forward to sharing this podium with Alan for a very long time. So I'm glad to be here. This has been an extraordinary journey. This book has been out for 45 days. It is in its third printing. It has been in the Wall Street Journal and Smithsonian Magazine, Preservation Magazine, Architect Magazine, and the museum show that accompanies this work opens this coming Saturday in Atlanta at the National Center for Civil and Human Rights, where it will be up through the end of the year, and then it will travel from there. So I appreciate all of y'all sharing this part of the journey with me. I'm going to show some slides. Let me go to share screen here, and there we go. I'll start with a simple notion for this crowd. The cover photograph of this book is from a South Carolina Rosenwald school. This is let me get my screen set here. There we go. Whoop. Okay. Sorry, that is the Pine Grove School in Richland County on the cover. And if you notice on the left-hand side, there is a quilt, and I'm going to show you a close-up of that quilt in a minute. This is a photograph of a photograph. This is a portrait of Julius Rosenwald that hangs in the Noble Hill School in Bartow County, Georgia. Julius Rosenwald was born to Jewish immigrants who had fled religious persecution in Germany. And as Robert said, he grew up across the street from Abraham Lincoln in Springfield. He rises to become the president of Sears, Roebuck and Company, and he leads Sears from 1908 until his death in 1932. He turned Sears into the world's largest retailer, and he becomes one of the earliest and greatest philanthropists in American history. And his cause was what would later become known as civil rights. Booker T. Washington, born into slavery in Virginia, becomes one of the most prominent African-American voices of the late 19th and early 20th centuries. And he is the founding principal of the Tuskegee Institute, the historically Black college in Alabama. This is a portrait of him that hangs in the president's home at what is now Tuskegee University. The two men meet in 1911, specifically May 18th, 1911. And I say that because this coming Tuesday is the 110th anniversary of their meeting. This is a rare photograph of the two men together, printed on fabric and sewn into a quilt to commemorate the restoration of the Pine Grove School in Richland County, South Carolina. And at the rededication ceremony, former students and former teachers were invited to and did sign the quilt, and it hangs in the restored schoolhouse today. Now, you have to remember 1911, when they meet, is before the Great Migration, which doesn't begin until later that decade. So 90% of African Americans live in the South. And public schools for African Americans are mostly shacks, with a fraction of the funding provided to the education of white children. Many jurisdictions do not even have public schools for Americans. And so in 1912, they create this program that becomes known as Rosenwald schools. And they reach out to the Black communities of the South. And they say, we want you to be a full partner in your progress. So if you will contribute to a school, and we will count as your contribution, cash, land, material, and labor. And if you will reach out to the school board, the white school board, because we want to be deliberate in establishing Black-white dialogue as a foundation for future progress. And these must be public schools. So the white school board, while we welcome their contribution, what we require is that they own, maintain, and staff the school, pay for the teachers. And if you will do those things, Julius Rosenwald will make a substantial contribution towards school construction. And from 1912, when the Lochapoka community in Lee County, Alabama, begins to raise the money for what will become the first Rosenwald school, until 1937, when President Franklin Roosevelt presides over the dedication of the school known as the Eleanor Roosevelt School in Meriwether County, Georgia, 1912 to 1937, this program builds 4,978 schools across 15 southern and border states. And this program transforms America. There are two economists from the Federal Reserve Bank of Chicago who have done 5 studies of Rosenwald schools. And what their data shows is that prior to World War I, there was a large and persistent Black-white education gap in the South. And between World War I and World War II, that gap closes precipitously. And the single greatest driver of that achievement, and it is an achievement, is Rosenwald schools. In addition, many of the leaders and foot soldiers of the movement to come through these schools. Medgar Evers, Maya Angelou, 5 of the members of the Little Rock Nine who integrated Little Rock Central High, Congressman John Lewis, all went to Rosenwald schools. And Congressman John Lewis, as Robert said, contributed this just extraordinary introduction to my book, which he completed exactly 2 months before he announced his diagnosis with cancer. Now, I first heard of Rosenwald schools in February of 2015 from a preservationist here in Atlanta, and the story absolutely shocked me. I am a 5th generation Jewish Georgian. I have been a progressive activist my entire life. The pillars of this story, Southern, Jewish, progressive activist, are the pillars of my life. How could I have never heard of this story? And so I came home and Googled Rosenwald schools. And what I found is that there were some books on the topic, but there was not a comprehensive photographic account. And so I set out to do exactly that. Of the original 4,978 schools, about 500 survive. And over 3.5 years, I drove 25,000 miles across all 15 program states and shot 105 of the surviving schools. This is the Emory School in Hale County, Alabama, likely the oldest surviving Rosenwald school, opened around 1915. It's what's known as a one-teacher school. I also found 2 teacher schools. This is the Hope School in Pomeria, South Carolina, and I include this deliberately to point out that when you go to the National Museum of African American History and Culture on the National Mall, you will find in that school 6 Rosenwald school desks, 1 potbelly stove, and the original sign proclaiming Hope School. All of those are from this school. That's a 2-teacher school and a 3-teacher school in North Carolina. Now notice that these are all small white clapboard structures. By the end of the program, they're building 1, 2, and 3-story red brick buildings. This is the Dunbar School in Pulaski County, which is Little Rock. Now, So there is, now of the surviving 500 or so schools, very few are still in use for educational purposes. This happens to be one of them. The Dunbar School is a magnet middle school today. But to survive, to restore these schools, they have had to have been adaptively reused by their communities. These are the Pleasant Hill quilters who sold quilts to raise the money to restore the Pleasant Hill Rosenwald School in Cass County, Texas, turn it into the community center that it is today, and the women gather most Mondays in the school to quilt. Others have been turned into church halls. Some are museums. This is the image on the cover of the book, the Pine Grove School. But many remain unrestored. This is in Newberry County, South Carolina, the Hannah School. And there is an inherent plea within this story for preservation, because each of these structures is a center of memory and history. And it's essential that we preserve these incredible stories and incredible moments and incredibly important aspects of the history of each of these communities. But the emotional heart of the story was the people that I met along the way. I found former students. These are Frank and Charles Brinkley inside the K. Rose School in Sumner County, Tennessee, under an original portrait of Julius Rosenwald that hung in this school from the day it opened in 1923. Frank and Charles both went on to college, both went to graduate school, both became educators. Their four siblings all went to this, their four sisters all went to this school, all went to college. Among the six brothers and sisters, they have 10 children. All 10 children went to college, a feat that might not have been possible had it not been for this schoolhouse. I also met former teachers like Ellie Damer, whose husband, Vernon Damer Sr., was a leader of the NAACP in Hattiesburg, Mississippi, was murdered for his activism. Vernon Damer attended this school during the civil rights movement. After it closed, he turned it into a locus of civil rights activity. His wife attended a different Rosenwald school, then she taught in this school, and her son Dennis has recently restored this school back to its community center origins. And I'm going to end on the story of the Hopewell School in Bastrop County, Texas. This is inside that one teacher school. The photograph center of this school and the center of this image is a portrait from the 19th century. That is Sophia and Martin McDonald. They were both born into slavery. And upon emancipation, Martin McDonald begins to raise farm animals. He acquires some land, he acquires some more land, and eventually he amasses 1,200 acres. And when the Rosenwald School program comes to Bastrop County, Texas in 1919, the family donates 2 acres of land for the school. The first teacher is their daughter. One of her first students is her daughter, Sophia Williams, shown here on the right, holding up this portrait of her grandparents. Her husband on the left, Elroy Williams, went to a different Rosenwald school in Bastrop County. And then they went to college and they came back and they spent their career as educators in this community. And now they are at the tail end of restoring this school back to a community center and museum. That is this, I found this story time and time again. Students becoming teachers, becoming the keepers of history and in memory in their communities. And I also found so many of these stories that I was moved to end up, this becomes a hybrid body of work. For I wrote a short story that goes with every image, or in some cases pairs of images, because I found Rosenwald schools that were connected to the Trail of Tears, the Tuskegee syphilis study, the Tuskegee Airmen, the litigation case of Brown v. Board. And so as you spend time with these books, as you spend time with these images, I hope you'll also read the stories, because I think you'll find them to be extraordinary. I think you'll find them inspiring. And I think you'll be moved to understand just how much change is actually possible in America.
Andrew, let me ask you to explain to the audience what Rosenwald's strategy was. I mean, how did he get white school board members to support these schools?
Yeah. So the genius that Julius Rosenwald and Booker T. Washington shaped together was that these were effectively what we would now call challenge grants. And of course, it's also a public-private partnership. Some of the earliest examples of both of those in philanthropic history in America. And it's really simple. Number one, they don't have to participate. And so at the beginning of the program, most of the financial contributions come from the Black communities, who, remember, are already being taxed to pay for white schools and are being asked to dig deeper to contribute to these schools. And then, actually, let me come off share screen here, Robert, and we can continue the, there we go. Okay. In the early part of the program, most of the funding comes from the Black community and from Julius Rosenwald. As the program progresses, there's more and more financial contribution from the white school boards. And that's really because of two things. Number one, the white school boards come to believe that Julius Rosenwald's participation gives them political cover. But the other thing is the Great Migration is accelerating, and the South is losing its African-American workforce. And the white leadership comes to understand that it has to provide better educational opportunities for the Black community if it's going to keep its workforce. And so by the end of the program, a substantial portion of the funds have actually come from public dollars.
And in these schools, do you credit them with producing the whole next generation, the civil rights leadership, political leadership in the Black community? Well,
not every, so 2/3 of all county, and if you take out Missouri, which entered the program late and only had 3 Rosenwald schools, the remaining 14 states of the program, 2/3 of those counties have Rosenwald schools. 85% of the counties that had a significant African-American population, school-age population, had Rosenwald schools. I mean, that is an extraordinary reach of this program. And these schools are open, many of these schools are open deeply into the 1960s and even early 1970s.
And the other aspect of the Rosenwald Fund was the Creative Workers Grants. Can you tell our audience kind of briefly about that?
Yeah, so let me go back to share screen and tell you one story that relates to that, because it really is an extraordinary story. So this is a book about the Rosenwald Schools program. But there is another aspect of Julius Rosenwald's philanthropy that was so significant, I felt compelled to include it in this work. And it was the Rosenwald Fellowships. They were created in 1928. They ran to 1948. And over 500, and they gave grants to over 550 African-American creatives, scientists, and intellectuals. And it is the largest source of philanthropic contribution to African-American leadership in the 20th century. And it is a who's who of African-American culture. Langston Hughes, Zora Neale Hurston, Jacob Lawrence, Marian Anderson. And the very first, so I wanted to tell this story. So how do you tell this story? Well, Gordon Parks happens to have been a significant influence photographically on my practice, because it is from Gordon Parks that I learned that photography can be a mechanism of social activism. And I first came across Gordon. I first saw Gordon Parks's work in the 1980s in an exhibition, a retrospective on his work at the Corcoran Gallery in Washington. I had the great privilege of spending some time with Gordon Parks in 1993 when he was on book tour for his memoir, Voices in the Mirror. And now in Atlanta, Georgia, strangely, I had become friends with his daughter, Leslie Parks Bailey. And so I said to Leslie, I had this idea. I would tell her father's story through her holding a photograph that he had made. And she put me in touch with the Gordon Parks Foundation, and they emailed me this self-portrait. And they said, how about self-portrait? It was part of Gordon Parks's application to the Rosenwald Fund. And I'm like, that'll work. And so, and then I then learned in my research that it was the Rosenwald Fund that placed Gordon Parks with the Farm Security Administration and Roy Stryker, which is the beginning of his which is the major milestone, the turning point of his photographic career. He didn't find Roy Stryker in the FSA. The Rosenwald Fund put him there. And so it is this transformative moment in his career. And so this is the portrait that tells that story.
Well, Andrew, thank you so much. I mean, the story is just so broad, and so even the Tuskegee Airmen, I was like amazed to learn this, that the Rosenwald Fund made it possible for the Tuskegee Airmen to learn, to fly and all. I mean, just the guy was everywhere. And Booker T. Washington.
Robert, he was they were the early funders of the NAACP and the Urban League. He was a major funder of the University of Chicago. I mean, he was everywhere. And he, you mentioned he was inspired by Abraham Lincoln. He clearly was. He was also inspired by his Jewish traditions. And that really comes through in that documentary, is just how inspired he was by the call, the calling of his faith.
It's just, and somewhere in the film, I think it says at the end that a third of the litigation costs in Brown versus the board were provided by the Rosenwald Fund. I mean, he was everywhere. So we have a local Rosenwald school, Richard,
yes.
St. George. We got to do something.
Well, as I want to turn to my friend Alan Nussbaum, and Alan, tell us a little bit of how you happened to fall into this world of the Rosenwald Fund and the Julius Rosenwald and the school in St. George.
I had heard about Rosenwald, but I really didn't know very much. And I went to a film, actually, I think it was probably in March or April of 2016. The Jewish Studies program at the College of Charleston and the Pearlstein-Lipoff Center sponsored the film that we actually have seen now. Many of you have seen in the last day or two, and hopefully all of you can see tonight if you haven't. And it really went through the whole Rosenwald project, and I was overwhelmed by it. And at the end of the film, we had a little reception, and people could meet each other, and I ran into the mayor of St. George, and she was extraordinary. And you'll meet her in just a little bit. Her name is Ann Johnston, and she came back to St. George where her husband had grown up. And after she had been there for a period of time, her husband passed away, and she was looking for something to do. So she decided to run for mayor. And she has the energy of an Olympic athlete, but not quite age-wise an Olympic athlete. And she was able to really make magic happen in that town. It was really extraordinary. But I ran into her. I had seen her before and had met her. And I said, "What are you doing here?" And she said, "I have a Rosenwald school that I would like to restore." And I said, "I want to photograph it." And she said, "Great." And that was the beginning of all of this for me. I've been up there probably more than 50 times in the last 5 years, and it's become really a hobby and a very important part of my life in the last few years.
Well, can we put up some of your images and let's sort of walk through, if we could, Alan, the process here. Is Rachel putting these up? Yes.
Yeah, Rachel's going to put them up.
Good. Okay, so
let's go to the first slide.
Yeah, she's going to get you there from the beginning. Okay. And there we go.
So this is a photograph of the front of the school as I encountered it the first time I went up there. She met me on the site, and I was with my wife, Nita, who was photographing with a phone or other camera. And this really shows the complete or almost utter destruction of the school. That's the state that it was in when I encountered it. The land had been cleared of trees over the last 2 years. The town of St. George had bought it with some political funding from the state. Senator John Matthews was a Rosenwald School graduate himself, somewhere in Orangeburg County, and he was very much important in making this happen. There was an alumni association which has remained very active in promoting the restoration. So they were really behind this thing from the beginning. So this is what the school looked like when I encountered it. It had been built in 1926. It was used until 1954 when the Brown versus School Board decision was made. The school board there said, we need to do something more than this school. And in order to keep integration from happening, I think that was their main motivation. And so they built a reasonably decent school. And this school became used as a community center and a gathering place during the civil rights movement. In the 60s, I think it was a Head Start program was run out of the school. And then in 1970, it was purchased by someone in the neighborhood, and it was filled with junk and debris, and it really became dilapidated and started to crumble. Let's go to the second slide. I'll show you the back of the school. This was a 6-room school. So the wings that you see on either side are classroom wings. There's a classroom in the front. The windows that you're seeing there are characteristic windows that you see in Rosenwald schools. They are built to let in light. Many of these schools did not have electricity early on. And so the windows are important. On the sides of the school, on the other side, this is the courtyard side, but on the outsides, there are banks of these windows in all the classrooms that let in tremendous amounts of light. So this is what the back of the school looked like. The roof is really almost non-existent. The foundation is crumbling. The floors inside the ceilings are really in bad shape. And let's go to number 3. And so this was taken a little bit later after the debris in the school had been cleared out. But I was struck repeatedly by the stark beauty of the color, of the dilapidation, of the really the decrepitude in these schools and in this school. And each room was different and had different things in it. You can see the ceiling has a hole in it. The wall is crumbling. The door frame is bent. The floor has been pierced. And I don't think this was one of the ones that I fell into, but I did fall into some of them early on. The floors were really, really rotten. And so this was sort of the state of the inside of the school. Just a little quick look at that. Mayor Johnston was very, very strategic in her planning for the school. Not only did she want to recruit the local people, but she really wanted to get the best people to do the building and the architecture. She found a guy in Charleston who many of Charlestonians know. His name is Glenn Keyes. He's a restoration architect, and he set about to develop a plan to restore the school in stages. There is a technique of allowing schools or buildings to dry out if they've been in this shape. And what they do is they build essentially a barn over it. This was a barn shaped like an H. It was an H-shaped Rosenwald school barn to cover a 6-room school. So it was huge, and you'll see that in a minute. Usually the piles are driven by a pile driver that's an impact pile driver. In this situation, Glenn Keyes felt that the foundation would not survive this kind of impact so close by. And so he developed the technique, and I think it may have been the first time it's ever been used, using these.
I did some. I was trying to move it closer to me, and then I was trying to move it closer to me, and something happened.
Please mute.
Please mute, please.
Whoever is on Joni Cutler's computer, please mute yourself. Thank you.
Okay. Anyway, so they developed a technique, set them in the ground, and you'll see some of these in a minute in different stages. And then they built a plywood structure over it and then covered it with protective fabric to try to prevent things from happening to, during the time it was under wraps. And it was really for about 1.5 years or 2 years that the school was covered up and air dried. Interestingly, that's during the time when Andrew and I found out that we were doing the same project, and my barn unfortunately kept him away from this school. Let's go to the next one. This is a picture of the barn after it's been built, and you can see the vast size of this thing. This is a huge structure. It's got open aeration places in the bottom. It's got along the lower level of the sides, there are vents for air penetration, and in the roofs, there are eaves that are open, and then the front and back of each of these sections is open to allow air to pass through there. So this is kind of essentially, instead of a clothes dryer, it's a building dryer, and it worked. And let's go to the next one. So this is to remind me to tell you a little bit about the interior structure of the school. The floors were removed in pieces, marked, and then kept in certain areas so that they could be reused if possible. And a tremendous amount of the floor actually has been reused. And I'll show you a little bit later how they're putting it back down. The windows, some windows could be rehabbed, and they went to a construction company in Charleston where they were rebuilt really by hand. The ones that could not be rebuilt had to be replaced. And so they went to another construction company that does fine wood work in restoration, and they were duplicated exactly. And so you'll see as we go on, you'll see the windows in place again. Let's go to the next slide. So this is what happened when they started taking the barn down. The barn was first taken down. The lower level of the plywood was taken off, leaving the upper level and the roof. And that gave them access to the foundation. And you can see here, they're little brick posts, and then they're concrete block posts. The brick, many of them have been restored, but those were the originals. There were so many that were damaged and really out of commission that they had to essentially rebuild most of the foundation. This view looks from the back of the main room, which is an auditorium, out towards the front. And you can see how much of the walls have been damaged and really, I mean, it was a mess. But the contractors did an incredible job of putting it all back together, as you will see over the next few slides. Let's go to the next one. So this is a little bit later in the process where they've taken off all of the barn sides, but left the roof on because the roof they're building the roof. They've got some type of fabric on the roof, but the new tin roof or aluminum roof has not really been installed. It turned out that this was done during the pandemic year where supply chains were interrupted, and it took a long time to get all the material for that roof. But so everything is dried out. There's a lot of new material in here, but the integrity of the school building and the way it was put together has been maintained. Next one. So this is actually was taken at the time that Richard Gergel and I did the interview with the mayor and with one of the alumni of the school, Mr. Ralph James, who has been very much involved in helping to supervise the construction of the school. And he graduated from this, I think he actually was an elementary school student at the school, but moved to another school after this, but he is one of the very loyal alumni of the school. So this is looking towards the back. You can see the red roof through the windows a little bit. And this is the auditorium room. There again, behind this, there are 3 classrooms. On the other side, there are 2 classrooms. And it's really quite an extraordinary thing when you look at, you're seeing the floorboards being put back in as really a jigsaw puzzle. You can also see the ceiling starting to take shape, and that all that structure is new. The windows in that room were, I really can't tell whether they were restored or completely rebuilt, but it's taking shape and looking like a Rosenwald school needs to look. Next slide. So this was about, I guess, 3 weeks ago. Richard Gergel and I went up and we interviewed Mayor Johnston, and we talked to her for a while, and then we got Mr.
James.
Right.
Mr. James.
Mr. James to be interviewed, and we went through this for a long time. This has been edited. It was a rainy day, but we had a videographer. But I want you to look at the front of the school and remember what it was like in the initial slide that I showed you. And this is now. This was 3 weeks ago. And at some point, the school will be converted into a community center, hopefully a museum, which will showcase the history of the school and also the Rosenwald project, I'm hoping. And this is a transition like I had never expected to see. And one more slide. And this is Mr. James and Mayor Johnston looking at the plans. Again, they are vitally involved in this. She is no longer the mayor. She stepped down about a year and a half ago and did not want to run again, but she made it clear that she wanted to maintain her contact with this project. So she's—
Alan, you're leaving out a little fact. How old is she?
I can't divulge her age.
91, I will.
She is as sharp as anybody could have been in their early 20s. And she has energy that's unbelievable. And she's going to see this project through. Her son wants her to move to Columbus, Georgia, where he is. And she said she will go when the school is finished. So. And I think that's all the slides I have.
We have any other slides?
That's all you let me have, Richard.
I'd say it's my fault. It is really stunning. Now we'll see some slides also in this video. Alan, you want to, Rachel, can we run the video? I'm not hearing any sound at all. Rachel, we're not hearing any sound. I don't know, Rachel, if you can hear me, that we're not getting any sound.
Sorry,
Well,
I have
Alan,
sound. I don't know what happened, but I can try it again if you'd like.
yeah,
Try it again, maybe because I was muted. I don't know. Would you like me to try once again?
right, it's only about 3.5 minutes, yes.
Right.
Prompt. It can be restored. So it's gonna take it.
Got to go back to the beginning though.
But
The center has sparked development, improvement all around. They weren't Rosenwald, they were built by the community and supplemented. The school district did to help out a little bit with the teacher salaries. Here you move from 6th and 8th grade to 10th, and then later on to the 12th grade. So now you had a full range of grades and the high school availability. So now provided the availability. So the school was very instrumental in providing adequate accommodations for that type of activity. I had the opportunity to serve on the South Carolina State School Board as we tried to progress and provide. South Carolina had not really been proactive and aggressive in providing progressive education.
I became mayor in 2007. And I had ridden with my husband. He loved to ride around and tell me stories of long ago. And I kept seeing this building back up here in the jungle. I didn't know a thing about Rosenwald schools. And it was just happened so that I read an article about it. And I thought, I wonder if that's a Rosenwald school. And I called the National Trust office in Charleston. And the lady there said, oh, we've been trying to get our hands on that school for Feiler. It is a Rosenwald school. And she led me to the Fisk University archives about Rosenwald schools. He bought the entire property. It can be restored. He said it's going to take a lot of time and a lot of money. But he said it can be done. And then he turned around and said it should be done. And that was from there on, with Matthew's help, banks, people in the community, contributions, grants, South Carolina Department of History and Archives, is very helpful.
This area can be utilized in contact with the local school districts. And we would replicate a regular classroom as it was during that time. We would get a corporate agreement with retired teachers who were here or taught here. And the students themselves, there's each class before you would have a lesson plan or whatever lessons were being taught that day. As you come visit the school, you would actually sit down, have that lesson, that day's lesson taught within the Rosenwald School by one of the teachers. Now we want to expand that further. There's a program called Call Me Mister, and we hope to engage the College of Charleston, Clemson, Claflin University, South Carolina State now. One of those programs, get those students who are involved in there, that they could assist the teachers in that experience.
Well, so
Well,
Alan,
Richard,
yes, Robert. I was going to ask, Alan, I know one of the things that we've talked about is some role that the Jewish Historical Society of South Carolina might play in the development of a history room at the new Rosenwald School, at least telling the story of Julius Rosenwald and helping the community in its efforts to tell the story of this remarkable school. And I know you've been involved with that. You want to sort of brief us on that?
There's always been a plan to have a museum about the Rosenwald Project and about the history of this school, in a room or two rooms in the school. And over the last few weeks, I've talked to Mayor Johnston about it, and then we've sort of refined it a little bit. And I think that the next step in this will be that the Jewish Historical Society of South Carolina will provide some expertise from museum planning groups to help them organize the museum in a way that they want to tell the story. And planning a museum is complicated. It's something that I don't think most people know really anything about, but there are professionals who can really make it zing and make it something that's going to be very attractive to the community. And so that hopefully that will happen over the next.
And I'm hoping that this work that you and Andrew and me have provided, this wonderful foundation of information and captured this story of this partnership between two enormously important Jewish and African Americans, Julius Rosenwald and Booker T. Washington, and this great vision they had. And it's important that folks in both the Jewish and African American communities know this story. It's a very uplifting story. I can just see watching the chat here, people are deeply moved. And I know Rachel and Lily and Robert all have received emails from friends after watching that movie saying, I was moved to tears by this story. And so Alan, I got to say that night I was at your home for dinner, I didn't get what you and Andrew were up to, but I kind of get it now. Thank you for being the head of the rest of us.
It's interesting.
Yeah, I
that-
think, Richard, I think this project is like a perfect opportunity for the Jewish Historical Society to talk about, Jewish history. It's right in St. George. I mean, this school could become a sort of a tourist attraction. It's a little out of the way, but it's a great opportunity, I think, for the society.
I think that it will be a place that people will visit, maybe as a side trip from Charleston, I'm not sure. But this is probably one of the largest Rosenwald schools that's ever been restored, for use as a community center. The changes in the community around the school, which was once a very vibrant African-American neighborhood, and then it really kind of sank in terms of the way it looked and the way people were taking care of things. There's been a movement to restore the neighborhood around it now. Some of the buildings that were restaurants or sweet shops, or there was a movie theater across the street which will not be rebuilt, but that land will be somehow marked for that. So it's going to really be I think it's going to be a very big deal for this town, which is a relatively small town, which was very vibrant as a center of commerce for the surrounding county 50 years ago. And I think that this school is going to help bring back the town a bit too.
I tell you, one thing we captured was speaking to Mr. James, was how much pride the African-American community has in this school and what it contributed to the betterment of the community over the many years it operated.
The Alumni Association is extraordinarily dedicated to this project.
So Richard, maybe this is a good time to open up for questions.
Yes. Lily, let's turn it back to our president. Lily, you're muted.
Okay, just had to get it moving for me. Probably one of the most important questions that people are asking is how can they contribute financially for the restoration or preservation of a Rosenwald school? And let me just say, this is something we have talked about. I feel like that, as you saw, you just can't go in and say, I'm going to put up some posters and this will be a museum. You really need to work with people who know how to set up a museum. And so we've discussed involving Historic Columbia, Historic Charleston, possibly the African American Museum that's being constructed in Charleston, maybe the YMCA, and we will get a facilitator who knows about museum setting and preservation and help lead us to that. I'm going to go out on a limb, Rachel, and say that in the meantime, if you are touched by this and want to contribute, you can send some contributions to the Jewish Historical Society of South Carolina, but you must earmark that this is for Rosenwald School restoration or preservation. And we will at least be the holder of any finances until we can then advertise more in terms of how we can certainly meet the expectations of the St. George community, work with the mayor, see exactly what they want, and then with a more professional museum outfit that can guide all of the stakeholders in the correct direction.
And Lily, we can also, as you know, in our expertise with history, Robert and I and others, Andrew and Alan, can provide some of the background information on the Rosenwald story. And of course, with these fantastic photographs, that can also support the museum exhibit. I'm sure they would be part of the museum exhibit.
Absolutely.
Rachel, it looks like some people are asking how they can see the film. Can you post or didn't you send out yep, I know it's over my head. Can you explain how people can see the documentary?
We have access to the documentary until midnight tonight. So if you didn't get it, I can resend to everybody that.
Do it, go ahead, do that.
I will send it out after midnight. Supposedly the link expires. The film is held by a foundation. Aviva Kempner was the director producer. They keep pretty tight control of it. And I have the contact information if anybody has an organization you think you want to share it with. It costs money. They're very nice to work with, but she keeps tight control. So just want you to know that, because a couple of folks said, how can we watch it after midnight? So I would say watch it before midnight if possible. So
Let me just add that my book is available on Amazon, but you can also order signed or personalized copies through my website, which is andrewfeiler.com/books. And I put that link in the chat.
And Andrew's too modest to show a picture, but I'll show a picture again.
And I think a question that has come up from a couple of people too, Richard, perhaps you could start this off, is how is it that such a philanthropist with such generosity that had such an important impact on the education of an entire group of people, how could he have gone so unknown to all of us? Is there an explanation, or Andrew?
There are probably many explanations, but let me, and I'd love to hear what Andrew has to say as well. We in Southern society have not honored white progressives of racial justice. That's just, my book on Judge Waring is that part of that story, of that long overlooked story. And Julius Rosenwald, he sunsetted his foundation, 1946. He intended 48. He intended it to go out of business. He didn't want it to be in perpetuity, and I think that contributed to it. But we have not honored those who have been heroes in the white community of civil rights, who were courageous and visionary. And the file, Andrew's he's in the third printing of his book. I've had a lot of interest in my book on the blinding of Isaac Woodard. It's gone through multiple printings. I think there's a real hunger out there for these stories, and I think hopefully that that we're kind of turning our focus on what I think is our sort of our, what Lincoln would have called our better angels.
Lily, I want to address something that impressed me the most about the film. I think Julius Rosenwald was a genuinely humble man. I mean, just looking at the film, one of the last scenes, he says, just because a man has made a fortune doesn't mean he's very smart. He said, in fact, all the evidence is to the contrary. The
other thing about Rosenwald is he never let his name be put on a building. He was the founder of the Chicago Museum of Industry, and they wanted to name it the Rosenwald Museum, and he said no way. And he also, he did have a fund that really timed out in 25 years, and in fact, I think they ran out of money before 25 years. And really, if you're not still giving money, then your name is really forgotten pretty quickly. And
it really, I think it's the most remarkable story, because the Rockefeller Foundation, the Ford Foundation, the Carnegie Foundation, we've heard of these things, but Julius Rosenwald wanted to give away this enormous amount of money and then have the whole thing end, and it was done. And it's just a mark of the humility of the man.
In his biography, there's a quote in there that says that when he was just starting out to really do well in Sears, he told his wife he wanted to make $15,000 in a year, and it would be $5,000 to live on, $5,000 to save, and $5,000 to give away. He really started out that way. And there's a lot about the sort of the setting of Reform Judaism in the church in Chicago with Rabbi Emil Hirsch, I think was the rabbi there, who was a profoundly involved civil rights leader. He was one of the early on in the Urban League and the NAACP. And Rosenwald funded lots of African-American YMCAs. He was moved into this field by, I think, that religious experience.
Andrew, I'd like to hear your thoughts on this.
Well, I think the key points have been covered, but what I would add is it's quite fashionable today in philanthropy for all the funds to be given away within a lifetime of the philanthropist or within a certain number of years of their death. Bill Gates has said that, Warren Buffett has said that, Bernie Marcus has said that. Julius Rosenwald was the first major philanthropist to say that. And his philosophy was that the generation that helped create the wealth should benefit from the philanthropic benefits of that wealth. And so he did mandate that the funds would all be given away within 25 years of his death. And as Alan mentioned, it was actually given away within 15 years of his death of 1932. And so the fund shut down in 1948. And we still know today the names Carnegie, Ford, Rockefeller, from the preservation of their foundation, the continued existence of their foundation. So it definitely plays a role. But one thing I'll add is that Rosenwald did not call these Rosenwald schools. They became known as Rosenwald schools. But there's another factor here, which is that many of the people who went to Rosenwald schools did not know that they were in Rosenwald schools. And in fact, when I reached out to Congressman Lewis at the very beginning to ask him to consider doing the introduction to this book, what he said to me was, I don't feel comfortable writing about the history of Rosenwald schools. I just know I went to school there. And I said to him, Congressman Lewis, there are 3 other essays in this book, all of which will speak to the history. What I want you to do is what only you can do. Bring me into that classroom. What was it like to go to school there? What role did education play in your life? And he said, oh, I can do that. But many of the people whose portraits that I did in this work, who went to Rosenwald schools, became teachers, became the preservationists in the community, did not know at the time they were going through these schools that it was a Rosenwald school.
Thank you. And as you all know, the Jewish mantra is anonymity is the greatest form of tzedakah. And I think we've seen that with Julius Rosenwald. I'd like to conclude this evening to tell you what's upcoming in June and July. We will be devoting that time to the South Carolina Jews and the law. It is June 27th and July 25th. Those will be very important dates to put down. There was so much in the law, according to Richard Gergel and Robert Rosen, that we need two programs to talk about it. When we get to medicine, we probably will need at least 2 as well.
We're committed to 2 right now. I know I can't get away from that now.
The programs will trace the early presence of Jewish lawyers and judges in South Carolina. South Carolina was the center of an early and vibrant Jewish community, which produced their first Jewish Chief Justice of a state Supreme Court, Robert Moses Sr. and
Franklin Moses. Actually, that was my mistake. Franklin Moses Sr.
Franklin Moses Sr. and lower court judges and numerous lawyers in larger towns and smaller communities. Our June program will focus on the early history up through World War II, ending with a focus on Coleman Karish, the son of a Columbia rabbi who became a legendary professor at USC School of Law for 40 years. July program will focus on post-World War II generation of Jewish attorneys who were mostly veterans and first-generation Americans. So we're going to wrap up this program, a phenomenal program. Thank you so much to our guests, Andrew Feiler and to Alan Nussbaum, and of course to Robert and to Richard on facilitating this. I think you'll all agree that we've all learned something. And even if you've seen the video once, look at it again. It was phenomenal. So take care, everyone. Be safe. And we look forward to seeing you at the end of June for our first of the Lawyer 2 programs. Good night, everyone.
Good night.
Thank you.
Thank you.